Today's notes are on scientific process and variables. We briefly discussed variables when we talked about data tables and graphs. Now we're going to take a closer look at the types of variables in an experiment. There are two types. The first is the independent variable. This is the factor that you are changing in each trial of your experiment. It is the only thing that changes in your experiment. The dependent variable depends on the independent variable. It's usually what you're measuring or the data that you're recording from your experiment. So it responds to the changes that you make in your independent variable. So for example, let's say that I have 3 flower pots. In the first flower pot, I plant 1 seed. In the second, I plant 5 seeds. And the third, I plant 10 seeds. My independent variable in this experiment is the number of seeds, because that is what I am changing in each of my flower pots. My dependent variable is what I'm going to measure. So in this case, what I want to know is, how does the number of seeds in a pot affect the growth of the plants? So what I'm going to measure is the length of the plants. If I could spell. Because the dependent variable depends on the number of seeds. Okay, the other things that we need to make sure that are included in our experiment are constants. Constants are important because we want the only variable that we're testing be the number of seeds. So I have the same type of seeds. I have the same size pot. I have the same amount of water. And other things could be the amount of sunlight. It might be where they're located in the classroom, so temperature controlled. That way you know the only thing that is affecting the growth of the seeds is the number of seeds in the pot. The other thing we must include is a control. The control is the one that does not get the independent variable applied, so it gives us a baseline to compare. So in this experiment, our control is the pot with 1 seed. If I know how much 1 seed would grow, then I can compare the growth of 5 seeds and 10 seeds to see if the number of seeds had an effect. All right, so let's go back to our definitions. So a constant is any factor that stays the same, and the control is the group that does not get the independent variable applied. And again, that gives us a baseline for comparison. Okay, another example. Here I have 3 different bird feeders, and I want to know which color bird feeder the local birds preferred. So in this case, the only thing that changes between each feeder is the color. So the color is our independent variable. Then I can measure maybe how much seed is left, the number of birds I observed visiting, to determine which color the birds liked better. So that would be my dependent variable. So we'll go with amount of seed eaten. So constant, anything else that is kept the same. So where they're located, where the kind of feeder, where they're put out. For this experiment, there is no control because each of our birdhouses has a color. Okay? So it's important to only change one thing at a time, because if I have multiple variables, then I don't know which is causing our results. So if I had birdhouses of different sizes, some were in the sun, some were in the shade, there's no way I could be sure that color is what is causing birds to choose one over the other. Okay, the next thing that I want us to look at is the scientific process. If you will copy this onto your paper, we're going to fill in the order of steps in an experiment. Now notice that it's just not steps in a straight line. we have a few bubbles with arrows going in different directions. So the first thing that we need to do in an experiment is come up with our problem or question. Let's see if it's going to let me write on this. There we go. Okay, so the problem or question is the initial issue that we want to study. So it's an issue or a question that we ask that we want to study. Now, you've probably been taught that you have your problem, then you make a hypothesis and experiment, but there's a few other steps in between. Before we make a hypothesis, we need to do some research to gather some data. So that's our observation. So to define our observations, that's our collecting data. Now that could be field research or field experience, where I go outside and make observations, or it could be researching scientific journals and seeing what other scientists have already studied. Once I have collected the data, the next step is interpretation. So this is where I look at all the data, the results of my research, and I determine what does that data mean. So our interpretation is our initial analysis of our data and our research. Okay. Now, once we have made our observations, we've done our research, we've interpreted our data, then comes the hypothesis. Now, you've probably heard the term hypothesis defined as educated guess all of your life. This is not a guess because you have done research, so it is based on what you have already observed. So for hypothesis, we're going to say it's a proposed, possible answer or solution to our question. So then our next step would be to test it, and that is our experiment. So the experiment is testing your hypothesis. All right, so once we've tested it, we look at our results, and we can come up with our conclusion. So the conclusion is generally a formal report. We explain our results and determine if our hypothesis was correct or incorrect. If our hypothesis was incorrect, so if it is wrong, then our hypothesis has been rejected. If that's the case, we go back, form a new hypothesis, experiment, go through the whole conclusion process. If it's wrong again, we continue going through the process. If our conclusion is correct, and we have confirmed our possible solution, then we want to reproduce our experiment and continue testing our hypothesis to prove that it is correct. So So if rejection, new hypothesis, is formed and tested, and her hypothesis is confirmed, we're going to double check. And confirm with new experiments. A scientist can spend years and years on a single problem or question. This is an ongoing process.